Hello, it's Wednesday, the 5th of March, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio. No, actually, he's not in the studio because it's an unusual week. Charles is at home today by video link, and also Vanessa Bailey and Sandy Adams joining us today as well. Now, later in the programme, we're going to be covering the latest from the MHRA, some gene editing info, and Syria and Africa. But we're going to begin with conscription, Charles.
Indeed, and good afternoon, Mike. Good afternoon, all. Thank you very much. Yes, conscription is now a topic that's sort of moving its way towards the top of the list of headlines, and we start with a look at the British Army and how they're changing the imagery to make it look like we are answering calls for war, telling in this slide that the medics in the foreground are the people that the army has chosen to suggest that we do need. It's a bit of an underlying message there. There's no doubt that the army is not ready for a large-scale conflict, especially not with an enemy that has a significant maneuver and combined arms capability, like, for example, Russia. But that doesn't stop the constant push for recruitment into the Ukraine conflict. Now, this seems to be beside the current recruitment and retention issues that are faced in the United Kingdom. Instead, there is a great push for people to join in Ukraine. This shown previously last week from the Ukraine border, so sort of with a computer game feel to it, and indeed pushing people towards the Ukraine Foreign Legion here shown on screen. And of course, this is because back in October, there was a change to the law made by the Ukrainian Rada, which specifically allowed officers to be enlisted from foreign nations, which was a change to the existing legislation, which only permitted other ranks to serve. So, as I say, there's a less of a focus on the recruiting of soldiers, either male or female, into the British Army, but certainly a big focus on the Ukrainian armed forces. But of course, what sort of reflected message is that going to send to the people in the UK? Now, the person who's most obviously sort of filled that void in terms of messaging, shown here, well, initially, at least on the Hope for Ukraine website, there are many ways in which people can be pointed towards joining up, or how it is that you get into Ukraine armed forces. And the former Conservative MP, Jack Lepresti, who was formerly a corporal in the territorial army, back sort of 15 or so years ago as a member of the Royal Artillery, now in very public fashion signed up for the Ukraine armed forces. And again, as I mentioned last week, unless he has had specific permission from the King, this does constitute an offence under the Foreign Enlistment Act of 1870. Now, the reason I go into the weeds a bit on the legislation is because this illustrates very, very well the degree to which the establishment may manipulate legislation when it suits it, and indeed may disregard it. You'll recall the remarks of Liz Truss, who actively encouraged people to join and fight for Ukraine. Of course, she gave absolutely no regard to this piece of legislation on the statute book. Ben Wallace and Tobias Ellwood notably weighed into the debate, as did Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, who pointed out that because of the existence of the Foreign Enlistment Act 1870, it was not permitted to carry out such an activity, which effectively stipulates that to join the armed forces of a nation that is engaged in conflict with another nation that the United Kingdom is at peace with, in other words, Russia and Ukraine are both, at least on paper, at peace with the United Kingdom, constituting an offence. But Grieve pointed this out, and this was countermanded by Bob Neill, who, rather incredibly, was chair of the Select Committee on Justice in the House of Commons, and he described it as being an antiquated piece of legislation and should be ignored. Now, interesting, again, in terms of cherry picking, because, of course, we look back to the Southport clampdown after the terrible events that unfolded there in the summer. And all the legislation concerning riot, violent disorder and affray comes from an even older piece of legislation, the Offences Against the Person Act of 1861. So cherry picking this absolutely is, in deciding that something from 1870 is antiquated, but something from 1861 is not. There's also the hypocrisy here in terms of the use of legislation to effectively to be disregarded some way. I've got a slide on now showing how much publicity the Presti affair has had, but also to point out that it's to encourage or assist in an activity, or at least to believe that somebody will conduct a criminal act, is an offence against Section 147 of the Serious Crime Act 2007. But that also has been disregarded. Looking at the other side of the coin, in terms of the hypocrisy, we see going back to 2017, there was an older man by the name of Benjamin Stimpson who was and is in prison. He was imprisoned due to terrorism offences, having joined pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. Of course, not a like-for-like comparison. But the point is that legislation will be used when it suits the state, and certainly not used when it doesn't. But to return to the issue of conscription itself, what I'd like to do is to take a look at a video produced for UK Column by Montgomery Toms, who went into central London to canvass opinion amongst the youth. So we'll just have a quick look and see what he encountered.
If you were forced to fight kind of against Russia on behalf of Ukraine as an English young man, would you do it?
Most likely not.
Would you fight, sir?
I don't have an opinion on political matters, if I'm honest.
It's not political. What if you were forced to fight and put your life on the line for this country? Would you do it?
No.
Fair enough. No one really would. No one I've met today would. And as a mum to this lovely young man, would you want him to fight?
Nope.
Do you believe in conscription in the UK?
Hell no.
Why?
Because I want to choose what I want to do.
Would you fight for England right now if you had to, if you were forced to?
Nah, you're right.
I would not.
For me, it's not for me, mate.
Do you think young men should be sent off to fight?
No.
Why?
Definitely not. Nobody should be forced to do anything. That's the first thing. Then in this century, there shouldn't be anything that should involve the word war as well. So this is my opinion.
It's a good opinion, I agree. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think we live in a society where, we can have discussions around a table. I think war is kind of a final option. I don't think we need to go to that, to be perfectly honest.
There are things that could be solved by talking.
We live in a society now where things can be resolved.
So as I mentioned halfway through this video, the response has been pretty consistent. People do not want to fight on behalf of the UK, and that doesn't seem to be changing. And most young people, they don't actually know what conscription is. I've had to explain what conscription is quite a few times now, and it just seems that young people are also just very detached from current affairs. They're not too interested in politics, they're not too interested in left or right.
So, first of all, a huge amount of naivety, bearing in mind how quickly conscription was actually jacked up back in 1939 with all the various acts that are passed. Now, that's part of a longer video, which I really would encourage you to go and watch on the UK Column website. And also, I'd point you towards the UK Column Extracts channel, which is, in this instance, on X, also on Telegram, because all of these reports are split up for you to be able to share and view as individual elements, which is a great way to spread UK Column content, of course. But the question that comes out of this and out of Monty's video is really what will change in order to alter the course of the public opinion of this generation. And we saw 5 years ago how behavioural tendencies of people were changed en masse by the confection of what was described as an emergency. What is going to happen to change public opinion with regard to conscription and war?
Thank you, Charles. We'll be talking about this in extra, particularly the issue of whether legislation can be ignored or not, just because it happens to be a little bit older. But Vanessa, let me welcome you to the programme. And let's talk a little bit about Iran. And I think we're going to kick off with people that have been to Lebanon recently, related to Iran, I suppose. But what happened to them?
Well, we're talking specifically about Dr. David Miller, who, of course, people will know from the last UK Column live event. So let's just play the video where he explains exactly what happened to him when he came back from Syed Hassan Nasrallah's funeral in Beirut.
So I was detained under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act when I came back from Beirut on Monday night, the 24th. And the reason for that was, of course, because I'd been at the funeral for Syed Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, and I had posted on X a number of posts about my experience of the funeral with shots of the actual ceremony itself. As a result, Zionist Twitter went absolutely crazy, started mass reporting me to the police, anonymous trolls known personalities, Zionist lobby groups, all calling for me to be stopped and detained under Schedule 7, and then the Daily Mail just after midnight, and then the Telegraph later on that day. And the Telegraph had a quote from Robert Jenrick, the former housing minister, who called for me to be arrested, said I was supporting terrorism and wasn't even hiding my anti-Semitism. Now, of course, Robert Jenrick has form in this regard. Of course, he's a fanatical Zionist, and he tried to get me sacked from my job at the University of Bristol, in which he was partially successful. So that's why I was stopped and detained under Schedule 7, because the Zionists bounced the police into doing it.
Of course, Section 7 was the section that I was also detained under a couple of years ago. And this has basically led me on to this oral statement by the Security Minister, Dan Jarvis, today, or yesterday, sorry, in which he announced that they will place the whole of the Iranian state, including the intelligence agencies, the Republican Guard, onto the enhancer tier of the new Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, FIRS, which is very similar to the FARA scheme in the US, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. In his statement, he said basically the director of MI5 recently stated that since the start of 2022, the UK has responded to 20 Iran-backed plots presenting potentially lethal threats to British citizens and UK residents. Well, I'm sure people would like more details on that. I'm also sure that people are going to get zero details on what exactly those supposed threats were. And he went on to say, this action will mean that those that are directed by Iran to conduct activities in the UK, such as criminal proxies, so he leaps immediately to the accusation that will be levied at anyone that has connections to Iran in the UK, must register that activity, whatever it is, or face 5 years in prison. So this, of course, means people like David Miller and others who are presenting a show in the UK that is effectively on behalf of Press TV, Iranian state TV, are going to have to register their activities. So, the crackdown on dissent and the challenging of UK establishment narratives continues, and the ramping up of antagonism against Iran.
Thank you, Vanessa. And of course, the justification for all this is national security. And you'd be glad to know that the College for National Security has begun a program of awareness sessions for civil servants here in the UK to boost, they say, understanding of the national security situation and also of this new body, the College for National Security, and the importance of national security across the civil service. Now, the first awareness event is going to be held in Edinburgh on the 19th of March, and future similar events are going to be held in Cardiff, Bristol, and other cities in the following months. And now this is Andrew Miller here. He's the head of the College for National Security. He said that national security is foundational for all of the government's key missions, and that makes our own drive to increase awareness of its importance and impact even more pressing. Okay, well, the College for National Security recently launched a new online course, and it's called What is National Security? And they are claiming that this will break down barriers to understanding national security threats and help civil servants integrate considerations related to national security into their jobs. So we should make no mistake that this is all representing a pretty fundamental shift in the approach to the governance of this country. Government departments right across government are being placed effectively onto a war footing. And there is one publicly available document from the college, and that is the 2025 Guide to the National Security Community. And I recommend everybody reads this. It's very interesting. It makes clear how national security is being placed right at the heart of every significant government department, as you just mentioned. And there's a series of case studies documented. So, for example, the Department for Science and Technology has this to say. In March 2022, hoax calls made to ministers from individuals purporting to be the Ukrainian Prime Minister were uploaded to YouTube. Now, of course, the most famous of this was Ben Wallace, as Patrick and I were talking about on Friday. Anyway, their statement goes on to say these were publicly attributed to the Russian state by Number 10 in a media briefing. Following this, the Counter Disinformation Unit, which was previously part of DCMS but has moved to the Department of Science technology engaged with YouTube to secure the removal of the videos. So here we have a clear acknowledgement that government is directly intervening with YouTube to get content that it doesn't feel is appropriate taken off. They went on to say this was on the basis that they were part of a Russian information and influence operation designed to achieve strategic advantage by attempting to embarrass the UK government and undermine its support for Ukraine. When YouTube was unable to identify the state link and therefore breach in their terms of service, the Counter-Disinformation Unit facilitated engagement, including via the declassification of relevant intelligence. So that's that example. The Department of Transport then saying that over the last decade, there have been several attempts to attack planes using concealed devices in hand luggage. One specific case, we worked with scientific experts to confirm the device's viability, used those results to develop new security measures and mitigate the risk, and introduced new domestic and international travel security procedures. And then GCHQ, well, there are some case studies for that, and I recommend you read them. But I wanted to focus on the legal framework that they operate under, because they said the Intelligence Services Act 1994 sets out GCHQ's function as a foreign-focused signals intelligence agency. And I just want to point out that would seem to be incompatible with the integrated operating concept, which is military doctrine in the UK at the moment, and which removes the distinction between foreign and domestic focus. And as we reported in the past, we should keep in mind that 77 Brigade, which was claimed by the government to only operate on foreign shores, was retasked domestically on a whim during COVID. So I'm uncertain whether we should accept the implication of this initial claim by the GCHQ. The second thing that they say here is that the Investigatory Powers Act 2016 governs the use and oversight of investigatory powers by law enforcement and the security and intelligence agencies. But as we've been talking about over the last few weeks, the amendments to the Investigatory Powers Act basically permits them to do all kinds of unpleasant things. So I encourage everybody to read that document. It'll be available in the show notes, and we'll have more to say about this in extra as well. Sandy, let me welcome you to the programme. What have you got for us on following on from Brian's report on Ukraine on Monday?
Thank you, Mike. Well, I've been looking really at what's happened in social media this week. We sort of saw what happened in 2020 with COVID, and it's almost as though the war in Ukraine and the Trump-Zelensky theatre show has really triggered people. It's become almost the COVID 2.0. We have to remember that it's the interest of the deep state to keep us all divided. I mean, I've had people arguing all the time, and it's important we don't fall for that bait. So I thought it would be just good to remind ourselves of the cover-up of corporate profiteering going on in Ukraine and the real reason for this devastating and corrupt war. Obviously, we know Starmer has just agreed to send more UK taxpayers' money to Ukraine this week. Investment so far to over 12 billion since 2022 in the alleged help in their fight for democracy. Most of this money, as we know, isn't actually going to Ukraine at all. Instead, it's being funneled into the pockets of defence contractors, multinational corporations and financial giants like BlackRock. This is a racket. I mean, it's a system designed to enrich the elites while keeping Ukraine in a cycle of war, debt and economic servitude, sadly. So where's the money actually going? Well, it's interesting. I think we've got another slide for this. The US has committed over 113 billion in so-called aid to Ukraine. But there's what Senate minority leader, Mitch McConnell, admitted some time ago, is that the money we're sending isn't really going to Ukraine. It's going to American defense manufacturers. So in other words, this money is flowing straight into the US military industrial complex. And this is what we've got. We've got Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Boeing, and General Dynamics, all receiving massive military contracts. And as this week, I know the Thales or Thales group have taken on a contract in Belfast to make munitions for Ukraine. This war isn't just about Ukraine. It's big business for the American war machine, sadly. And as war rages on, what happens after the war? Well, that's where even bigger profits come in. BlackRock has already signed agreements with the Ukrainian government to advise on post-war reconstruction. They're helping structure investment funds to build Ukraine. But it's not charity. Obviously, BlackRock and its investors will control how rebuilding funds are going to be spent and who benefits. This means major Western corporations will seize control of Ukraine's post-war economy. So, it's taxpayer money will fund it, but corporations will profit. I mean, this is what happens, unfortunately. And so it's all being sold to the highest bidder. So, how does it work? Well, Ukraine's economy is devastated. It can't repay the billions in loans from the US, the EU, the IMF, and the World Bank. And that's the whole point. These loans aren't really designed to be repaid at all. They're designed to keep Ukraine under Western economic control forever. And how it works is that, Ukraine takes on massive debt. In exchange, Ukraine is forced to sell off its national resources, farmland, energy infrastructure to foreign corporations. And when it defaults, its economy is handed over to the Western financial institutions and multinational corporations that have bailed them out. This is how it works. It's the same IMF debt trap that's been used in Latin America, Africa, Eastern Europe and Iraq. So, Ukraine isn't being saved, it's being colonized by economic means. And that's really where it ends. Now, who owns Ukraine now? One of the biggest conditions of these loans is to sell off its farmland to foreign corporations. Ukraine has the richest farmland in Europe, the breadbasket of Europe, and Monsanto, now Bayer, buying it up, DuPont, Cargill, three of the biggest agribusiness firms in the whole world. And who owns big shares in all of these? BlackRock. It's BlackRock again. Right now, 30% of Ukraine's farmland is already owned by foreign corporations. The same Western powers funding Ukraine's war are now taking its land. 500,000 Ukrainians have died in this war. And did they die so their land could be taken by Monsanto? I don't think so. We've got NATO's expansion. Weapons manufacturers have been pushing for NATO's expansion for decades, and the arms industry has lobbied for Eastern European countries to join NATO. So more members, more defence spending, more profit. This is how it works. It's used as a massive wealth transfer. Post-war reconstruction will make BlackRock and Western corporations even richer. Meanwhile, Ukraine is being bled dry. War, then debt, then privatization. And the same corporations profiting from Ukraine today will push for the next war tomorrow. That's just how it works. Meanwhile, Starmer has agreed that Thales is set to manufacture these weapons in East Belfast. Russia had previously warned against military aid to Ukraine from the UK and may perceive the new factory as a direct threat. I doubt if they'd, use it, a direct attack would trigger NATO's Article 5. However, hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, economic retaliation, political subversion is far more probable. And 2 years ago, people in Belfast did protest against any of the weapons manufactured by Thales. And I wonder if they'll keep up this pressure. Let's hope they do. Meanwhile, our Defence Secretary is off to Washington to talk about peace, the highly profitable rebuilding of Ukraine, I'm sure. So that's my final words on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Now, you'll just have to give me 1 second here because I have to make a quick adjustment to the running order. And so just 1 second, and then we can go again. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Sandy. If you like what the UK Column does, if you'd like to support us, please go to support.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. You can make a donation or join as a member. And if you do join as a member, that gives you access to extra content and so on. If you'd like to pick something up from the UK Column shop, please do. And if you do use the link on this page to buy something from clive2carl.com, we will get a small commission for that, and that helps us as well. If you can't do anything financial, that's fine. If you could possibly share the material as far and wide as you possibly can, that would be great, because that is what keeps us going as well and deals with the situation of censorship. Well, I've completely messed this up because I've taken the wrong slide across. But anyway, here we go. We will just use this one to illustrate, Charles, the upcoming event on April the 5th. Have you got any thoughts on how great a day this is going to be and why everybody should be there?
I've got plenty. I wouldn't want to take up the entire programme, but we have talked variously about the amazing array of speakers that we'll have, obviously, but also the fact that the UK column team will be there. We're going to especially sort of split the day up so that people have got a lot of time to talk to one another, to talk to the team, to talk to the speakers. There'll be very much a sort of back and forth where each speaker will have a decent amount of time allocated to questions. So for those of you that haven't yet booked, please do. It's going to be a phenomenal event. And of course, today, having talked so much about national security and all the legal and other elements of background to it, there'll be no greater place to go to catch up with exactly sort of where we are with all of this with regard to the deep state.
Thank you, Charles. Now, tomorrow at 1 p.m., Brian is putting out another interview in his continuing series on child stealing by the state. This one is entitled "The Child Snatch: State Protectors Turned Child Abusers." That is 1 p.m. tomorrow. We absolutely encourage you to watch these interviews and these discussions because, as harrowing as some of them are, this is a topic that we've been trying to get the lid off for so many years, and we absolutely need everybody's help to do that. And more and more people coming forward to discuss this issue. Do watch at 1 p.m. tomorrow. The discussion that I had with Carl Zah is up on the website. That went out at 1 p.m. yesterday. We began by discussing whether or not China is still a communist country, and then went on to talk about Xinjiang and various other China-related topics. So have a look at that if you can. And Charles, you wanted to mention the editor's choice section on the front page of the website.
I did, absolutely, yes, because I think with each passing day, as the sort of familiar and indeed kind of rhyming sense we get of all these stories that UK Column covers, they refer back in so many instances to themes that we've seen in the past. And I just like to draw people's attention particularly to Editor's Choice, which is updated once a week. And it's where we put UK Column content that bears direct relation to things that are happening now. And it is incredible to think that, you know, we go back now for sort of well over 15 years to things that were being spoken about, written about, and, you know, talked about in great depth by UK Column well before what we're seeing in front of us now. So Editor's Choice is a great place to go to get the extent of the pedigree of the UK Column content.
Yeah, I'm depressed to say that 2026 will be the 20th anniversary of the UK Column, but there you go. And then finally, supporting Farmers for Food Security Symposium.
Yes, absolutely. This is an event happening next Sunday, the 16th of March, just outside Cheltenham in Sherdington. So there are tickets still available. There's going to be a great lineup of speakers talking about all manner of things pertaining to your own ability to sort of guarantee food security for yourself. I'll be there comparing the event, and Sandy will be speaking, among many others. So do get a ticket if you can.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Now, let's move on then to Tony Blair, who has raised his head again. And we have had the coincidence of Starmer announcing his big AI initiative, which will give us all personalized mRNA jabs within and he did that within a week of Trump announcing exactly the same policy, and a week before Trump announced exactly the same policy. And now the Tony Blair Institute has decided to weigh in the discussion once again. And this is something they've been promoting as hard as they can, of course, for quite a long time now. But their latest report is all about governance in the age of AI. The United Kingdom should lead the world in artificial intelligence-driven innovation, they say, in research and data-enabled public services. It has the data, that's Britain has the data, they claim, the institutions and the expertise to set the global standard, but without the right infrastructure, these advantages are being wasted. So Tony Blair then is getting right behind Starmer's creation of the of a national data library, which was announced as part of Starmer's AI Opportunities Action Plan. And in this report, Blair describes, or the authors describe the UK's data infrastructure as fragmented and unfit for purpose, and that public sector data are locked in silos, access is slow and inconsistent, and there's no system to connect these and use data effectively, or any framework for deciding what additional data would be most valuable to collect given AI's capabilities. And because of this, they say research is stalled and AI adoption is held back. But the National Data Library represents an opportunity. According to them, it can help create the infrastructure needed to unlock the value of public sector data alongside frameworks to identify and collect new types of data through breakthrough insights, whatever that means. Instead of a complicated web of systems and slow one-off approvals, the National Data Library will establish a clear, secure way to access linked data sets, supporting AI innovation, better policy making, and research that drives economic growth. It will not centralize data, but will put in place the legal, technical, and governance structures to ensure that high-value data sets can be used efficiently while maintaining security and trust. Now, linked data sets, it's a topic that I've been warning about for years. I've been arguing that the original Data Protection Act was nothing whatever to do with protecting anyone's privacy. It's a register of databases in preparation for linked data sets and AI. And the Data Use and Access Bill, which is at committee stage, we've been talking about it for weeks, takes this even further. And I'm going to suggest that human beings are being farmed. Data is the only commodity of any value anymore, at least as far as some of the people that seem to be wheedling their way into the British government, the United States government, the European governments are concerned. So we'll have more to talk on this a little later as well. Just put the Data Use and Access Bill up on screen again to remind everybody about this. This should be one of our top priorities, I think, at the moment. And it enables so much of the digital ID infrastructure that's required for what's coming. Let's go back to international affairs then. And Vanessa, what's the Balkanization of Syria is really something that you've been talking about since the takeover before Christmas. But where's it at the moment?
Well, I mean, the partitioning plan for Syria, which of course was mentioned by John Kerry back in 2016 as being Plan B, is now swiftly becoming Plan A. And Syria, with everything that's going on, is now also becoming the key focal point for the competition between Israeli expansionism and Turkish neo-Ottoman expansionism. Israel has recently put out a statement refusing HTS presence in the southern areas of Syria that Israel has now annexed and occupied, and effectively threatening HTS with military aggression should they infringe upon the Israeli-occupied territories south of Damascus. And recently, very close to Damascus, in the area of Jaramana, which is also close to the, let's say, pivotal Shia Muslim pilgrimage site, Sayyidah Zainab, there have been clashes between HTS and the Druze minority factions that appear to some degree to have been manufactured or orchestrated in order to enable Israel to intervene ostensibly on behalf of the Druze. And Israel has put out warnings against the HTS junta in Damascus, warning them against attacking the Druze factions as tensions simmer near Damascus. Netanyahu and Israel Katz, the current defense minister, have also put out statements saying we will not allow the Islamist regime in Syria to harm the Druze. If the regime harms them, it will face consequences from us, Israel. And of course, what this is Israel basically hijacking any kind of confrontation between the Druze and HTS in order to advance their own interests and to come nearer or closer to Damascus itself. So this was put out on Telegram by The Cradle. 3 hours ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement in support of the newly formed Sweida military council vying to defend the majority Druze city of Jaramana, southeast of Damascus. against the extreme Islamic regime of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. The statement came just after clashes were reported, and local sources have spotted trucks with Israeli and Druze flags carrying so-called aid in Suwaida. Multiple convoys of trucks have entered from the southern Israeli-occupied territories in as far as northern Daraa. Sources claim HTS fighters reportedly withdrew after Israeli jets and drones were seen in the area. So Israel basically flexed its muscle in order to force HTS to withdraw. Or, of course, as I said, this is potentially orchestrated to allow Israel to advance. This was put out on X. Israel is now advancing 13 kilometers deep into Syria in the Tel al-Mal Peak in the Daraa Governorate. So this is north of Daraa. Advancing further than they had before, where a Syrian military post once stood. Israel has also been bombing these areas to finally destroy remnants of Syrian Arab army positions and air defense, both in the south and on the coast. Israeli bulldozers were also heard in the area, as well as helicopters and drones. Military vehicles were seen in the nearby town of Mashara and on a road to the Syrian Al-Taiha village. All of this north of Daraa, and again coming much closer to Damascus itself. This is just a photo of the Israeli forces digging in these areas and building fortifications, military fortifications. And if we have a quick look at the map, this was supposedly published in Hebrew media, but I didn't actually find it there. But it does show very clearly how the Zionist forces imagine advancing to Jaramana on the back of, in the green, the two arrows there, showing the Druze militant advances and reinforcements sent into Jaramana, which you can see is extremely close to the capital itself. However, certain Druze factions that have remained loyal basically to the integrity of Syria have put out a statement. Sheikh Hamoud al-Hinawi of Suwaida said that the Druze community did not bear responsibility for Netanyahu's statements, claiming he wants to protect the Druze community through a complete demilitarization of the south, and that they reject any ties with Netanyahu. So again, that suggests to me that certain factions were orchestrating this conflict in Jaramana in order to facilitate the advance of the Israeli forces, of course, all with the tacit approval of al-Jolani and HTS. Now, this is quite interesting. This is in the Syrian Observer. Israel's strategic ambitions in Syria, fragmentation, balkanization, the David Corridor, and confrontation with Turkey. So, as I said, Israel is now waking up to the fact that it does face competition over the control of Syria from Turkey and from Erdogan and his neo-Ottoman ambitions. This is effectively what is known as the David Corridor. So what Israel is going to attempt to do is to take control of the areas in the south and then basically extend the corridor up the eastern flank of Syria on the borders with Jordan and Iraq. And you'll see there also the Al-Tanif, the largest US unlawful military base in Syria, with the potential that Israel could replace sorry, could I just go back to that map for 1 second? Could replace the US military presence there with Israeli settlers, and then to basically join the US managed or controlled Kurdish sectors in the northeast that also have control over the oil sector, in order to basically put obstacles in the way of Turkish expansion also to the northeast. And finally, just to have a quick look at the map of Syria itself, we can see there the area in question to the south. So you have Suwaida in the white circle, and then obviously extending up towards Damascus and Jaramana, and how the corridor itself would basically link Israel to the far northeast, covering the borders of Jordan and Iraq. So what we're seeing now, and I'll cover this also in the next section with regards to Israeli collaboration with Russia, we're seeing, I think, the beginning of confrontation between Israel and Turkey.
Thank you, Vanessa. Now, of course, the whole Syria thing began as effectively an insurgency Western-backed insurgency. Other Western-backed insurgencies exist, and Africa, particularly the Sahel region, is one of the areas that suffers from this kind of thing. We haven't covered it half enough on the UK Column News, but let's do something to address that now. Charles, what have you got for us?
Well, I think so much of what we're covering today is interrelated, and specifically I'm going to be talking about the Horn of Africa, which is little considered given its geopolitical and strategic significance, but we look at yet more effective chatter from the United Nations Security Council, Barbara Woodward, saying that sanctions against the Al-Shabaab group are being reinforced. This is really a sort of rehash from what happened in December, but concurrent with this is there's been a sort of brokering in Turkey of the relationship between Ethiopia and Somalia, which of course was so destabilised, primarily, in fact, by the United Kingdom meddling in the Port of Berbera shenanigans with regard to DP World and investment and a trade corridor, the Hargeisa corridor, to give Ethiopia coastline and recognise Somaliland sovereignty. So a complicated story, but something that has given rise to sorry, I've gone on too far. Given rise to speculation, or at least the connection between the Al-Shabaab activities and indeed the Houthi, what they're describing as Axis, or network of resistance in Yemen. And this is going back from last year, the Royal United Services Institute, talking about the alliance, or indeed the way in which weapons were moving from Yemen through to Somalia for Al-Shabaab. Of course, the villain of the piece not just being the Houthis, but also Iran. And this is why this all relates very much back to the statement that Dan Jarvis has made that Vanessa's already been talking about. So there's that element to it, and indeed this idea of there being sort of state threats either from Somalia, Yemen, or most particularly Iran. But concurrent to this, we've got the change in the UN mission in Somalia, gone from ATMIS, the transition mission, to what's now called, I'm not sure whether you pronounce it awesome or awesome, but it's the African Union Security and Stabilization Mission. And the issue, as pointed out by DefenceWeb here, is one of funding, which of course is slightly ironic given the subcommittee on delivering government efficiency, the DOGE hearings, which have been going on in the United States over the last couple of weeks. So I'm just going to play a short video clip now, which puts into focus the funding of any UN mission in Somalia, particularly with regard to countering the activities of Al-Shabaab.
Mr. Roman, are you aware that we are sending $40 million a week to the Taliban?
Yes, sir.
Can you name other instances of foreign aid going to terrorist organizations?
We have assisted Al-Shabaab in Somalia. There's been instances of the Khamsi network in Sudan, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Kataib al-Hezbollah, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams in Syria. Dozens of terror organizations have received indirect assistance from U.S. foreign aid.
Now, seemingly explosive, of course, on the face of it, but I think the question to be asked is why would this information be released? And to get a bit closer to that, we must take a look at who Greg Roman is, the chap who was speaking then. And I think most relevant to what he was saying is his role as a director of Middle East Forum, and the fact that he has worked for the Israeli government and its Ministry of Defense. So although he is pointing out that these organizations have, of course, been funded by the United States, still it is very easy to take that information and still look towards Iran, or indeed look towards supporting Israel. And the other thing that we should not ignore, and this relates very much to what Sandy's been talking about with Ukraine, is actually the focus on Somalia itself. And I've got an article that goes back to 2021 suggesting that Somalia could be the first cashless society. This, of course, in African business. That was perhaps optimistic, but nonetheless, it suggests the efforts that are being made behind the scenes. Somalia, as a frame of reference, only introduced its first cash point machine, first ATM, back in 2014, but they have come on apace. And the Central Bank of Somalia, which is the sort of current iteration of all the Italian banking systems that were set up over the decades of the 20th century. But it has now produced something called SIPS, which is a payment system that connects the central bank to all of the commercial banks in Somalia. And no great surprise then to see that this is coincident with the announcements from the United Nations International Organization for Migration, talking about the stronger legal identity systems. Of course, what they really mean there is digital ID. The IOM has $3.5 billion a year funding to be able to promote these sorts of initiatives. And it should be made clear that some of their funding does, of course, come from private and philanthropic sources. So all of this, what starts as an apparent effort to deal with al-Shabaab, when you scrape away beneath the surface, you see that actually this is giving an opportunity to reset a part of Africa that, as I say, does have great strategic significance. There are a lot of countries operating in that area. And of course, the relationships with both Yemen and Iran would be, to my mind, exactly why we're having these sorts of bits of information pushed out into public domain. It'd be very interesting to see where this goes in light of the UK's push for deciding or describing Iran as being a state threat.
Thank you, Charles. Sandy, let's welcome you back, and back to Ukraine and the question of religious freedom there.
Yeah, well, we're running up to Easter. It's apparently it's Ash Wednesday today, if you didn't know. And it's been almost a year to the day since the Ukrainian government waged a war on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the UOC. And it goes way beyond security measures. I mean, they were saying that they felt that they were pushing Russian propaganda. But it really does constitute a direct attack on Christianity itself. While every sovereign nation has the right to protect itself from threats, Ukraine's crackdown on the UOC, including the closure of churches and arrests of priests and and congregations, and the forced transfers of religious sites, raises serious concerns about religious freedom. The UOC has been the main church in Ukraine for over 1,000 years. An American human rights lawyer called Bob Amsterdam has been very vocal on these arrests, and he's recently been interviewed on Tucker Carlson. Do look at that. He's been campaigning for the UOC for the release of the priests and to stop this oppression. 1,500 churches have been seized, all their land and their artifacts stolen. And they even have a law, it's Law 3894, to destroy the UOC. So this is really, it really is an attack on religious freedom. Freedom of religion is a cornerstone of democracy, and it's enshrined in international law, including the Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Despite this, Ukraine has systematically targeted the UOC, and what's interesting is it's very selective about who are being persecuted, and this really does suggest that the government's true motive is not security. It's an attempt to eliminate a particular branch of Christianity in favour of Zelensky's state-approved Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which was he brought about 5 years ago. You've got a 1,000-year-old church being replaced with a 5-year-old church that's state approved. I mean, you couldn't make it up. It's the SBU, which is the security, secret security police in Ukraine, are taking actions against the UOC, including the detention of the clergy. And really, they're behaving a bit like a Stasi. It reminds me of what happened in the Second World War, and the Gestapo in Nazi Germany and the Stasi in East Germany. They use intimidation, surveillance, and political persecution to silence opposition, and they carried out raids on religious and political institutions that they deemed as a threat to the state power. This is really happening in such a brutal way. And what I don't understand is in the UK, we've got the Freedom of Religion and Belief Act, which is understanding this as a human right. So why aren't we doing anything to protect this this church? It's a Christian church, and they're destroying it. It's really unbelievable what's happening. And just to wind it up, religious persecution should only have a place. Persecution should have no place in a nation that claims to be fighting for democracy and freedom. And at the end of the day, people should be able to pray in their own churches, especially at a time of war when people are stressed and people are dying. You need that. You need that spiritual connection, and that is being destroyed in Ukraine right now. If you want to support them, do go to I think it's called. Where is it? Yeah, support the SaveTheUOC.com. If you really want to go and if you want to support them, go to that website. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Vanessa. Let's come back then to Israel and diplomacy with Russia.
Yeah, well, we talked about just now the race to control sectors of Syria by Israel and Turkey. So let's see where Russia is positioning itself in the new regional alliances. So after the clashes in Jereman that we talked about, Netanyahu dispatched his military secretary, Haj General Roman, what's his name? Goffman to Moscow, thank you, for a series of high-level security and diplomatic meetings. One of Israel's key concerns, we're back to this, is Turkey's growing influence in Syria. And then we look at the fact that Israel is strengthening ties with Russia, according to Hebrew media, in a bid to curb Turkish influence in Syria. Jerusalem deepening security coordination with Moscow while working to curb Turkish influence in post-Assad Syria. Amid rising tensions, Netanyahu authorizes military action against, which are the HTS forces, and urges Moscow to pressure Hamas for hostage talks. So interesting that Moscow is now positioning itself as a mediator in the region after what happened in Syria in December last year. And then this is from the same article: Israel seeks to block Turkish-Syrian military pact. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan is expected to host Syria's new president, Jolani, leader of the jihadist rebel factions that toppled Assad. Their discussions are set to focus on establishing Turkish military bases, training Syria's reconstituted armed forces, and securing the country's airspace. So the rivalry is becoming very obvious here. But I just wanted to show this video that has been circulating on social media that may put a spanner in Erdogan's works towards gaining control or the upper hand in Syria. These are HTS representatives alongside Zionist officials at a conference, and this is an HTS representative speaking at that conference. So let's play this.
Resistance. And my first visit to Israel after 7 October, I'm coming just for 7 October to support my friends and my brothers here in Israel. And I visited Nova. It was really shocking for me when I see the pictures of people who come just celebrate or dancing or some things like that.
So very clear there that HTS is aligning itself with Israel. Moving on, Israel actually lobbies the US to keep Russian bases in a weak Syria, sources say. So allegedly, Israel has been lobbying the Trump administration to allow the Russian bases to remain on the coastal region in Syria, again, potentially as a block to Turkish control in that area, which has been heavily persecuted by the HTS factions, ethnically cleansing Alawite factions, Shia factions, and even Christian factions from the coastal region and coming down towards Hama and Homs heading towards Damascus. Now, what is very interesting in the midst of all this apparent collaboration between Russia and Israel, according to Hebrew media, Israel has been invited to Russia's May the 9th parade, while unfriendly nations excluded. Israel is apparently among the nations invited to Russia's May 9th parade, or VE Day parade in Moscow, along with Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas, who is known, of course, to be pretty much a proxy of the Zionist regime inside the occupied territories. And the Kremlin has said it will not invite leaders of unfriendly states, including Ukraine, Germany, France, and others. Interesting, until now, Iran doesn't appear to have been invited, but Israel is. And of course, what are the British doing? The British are actually aligning themselves through a rather junior Foreign Office member who I think yesterday or Monday was having talks in Istanbul to discuss post-Assad Syria in Ankara with Erdogan. So interesting that the British appear to be aligning themselves with the neo-Ottoman Empire, having, of course, previously been the enemies of the first Ottoman Empire. So interesting times, and a lot of maneuvering by the regional alliances.
Yes, well, we will watch this space. Thank you, Vanessa. Now, let's come back to the UK then and finish off, well, first of all, the MHRA, because the government has announced today that they've appointed Lawrence Tallon as the new Chief Executive Officer of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. He's going to begin that role from the 1st of April. So my question is this an April Fool's joke? Maybe, but we'll see why in a second. So anyway, he began his civil service career in 2002 as a policy manager before becoming private secretary to the Secretary of State for Health just 4 years later. And so that was quite a meteoric rise. He stayed at the Department of Health for 5 years. Then he went into the private sector for another 5 years and then went back to the National Health Service. Now, of note is that he's currently a limited partner at KHP Ventures, which, as you can see on screen, describes itself as giving equity investments with healthcare expertise for groundbreaking med tech and digital startups. So let's have a look at some of the investments. So what we're looking at is mainly AI medical devices, and which are exactly the same, exactly the kind of thing that the MHRA is supposed to be regulating. So the question is, could this be a conflict of interest, or is this putting the right man in the job as an enabler? So I presume he will resign from KHP. Just take that off screen for a second, Stephanie. Thanks. I presume he's going to resign from KHP Ventures at the very least before the 1st of April, but we will watch this space and see. But sticking with utter madness, you got a preview of it there. Let's just have a look at it now. The genetic manipulators are out in force trying to raise money for Jurassic Park, it seems. This is an organization called Colossal Laboratories and Biosciences, who are into gene editing to recreate what they describe as the lost megafauna and other creatures of the past. But only the ones they say that had a measurably positive impact on our fragile ecosystems, like the woolly mammoth, for example. They hope that having mammoths running around the Arctic tundra is going to encourage grass to grow, which is going to capture loads of carbon dioxide. So as you see from what you're seeing on screen at the moment, they are into gene editing and so on. But they've decided that they are going to gene edit a mouse and give it long hair as a first step along the way to woolly mammoths. But don't worry, they'll only start implementing they'll only start experimenting on actual elephants when they're convinced that the process is safe and effective. So what could possibly go wrong? Anyway, remember, this is all enabled in the UK by the Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Act 2023. And if you remember, when it was introduced, Joe Churchill, the Minister for Agri-Innovation, said new genetic technologies could help us tackle some of the biggest challenges of our age around food security, climate change, and biodiversity loss. So certainly what we've just been talking about covers the second of those two. But as Charles reported some time ago, this isn't about vanity projects like it isn't only about vanity projects like woolly mammoths. It's this is happening to our food supply. So what were we saying? Spring 2025 for trials of precision bred cereals for us. This is the type of food that we're going to get. So again, I'm just going to finally ask what could possibly go wrong with this. Plenty to talk about in Extra in a few minutes' time, but we've got to leave the news there for today. I'm going to say thank you very much to Vanessa, Charles, and Sandy. Stick around on the live stream if you are a UK Column member for Extra. Otherwise, don't forget the interview tomorrow at 1 p.m. We'll be back as usual on Friday for more news at 1 p.m. See you then. Bye-bye.